before we do, normally we start these interviews by asking about the person's life story. And you've had an interesting one. So I definitely want to at least sort of establish your story for people who are listening to this and going, who is this crazy German lady? So what got you interested in the body, Ilan?
Oh, did I already somehow made clear that I'm crazy?
Always. Listen, I've got a pink drink to match the top of your pink jumper.
Thank you so much. So we will publish this video in order to show that this is
I think we have to do
choreography.
The video, not just the audio for this one. Actually, we're starting doing more videos on YouTube. So those of you who listen to the podcast, if you want to watch videos, some people are more visual, then you can go to our YouTube channel. It's the Embodiment channel.
Yes, so, because both of us prepared ourselves in pink.
Look, I put a shirt on for the doctors this morning. Yeah. You've got your nice pink jumper. I think people should see it, Ilan.
We didn't sleep. We just talked about our outfit, Mark and Ilan. Can I go like that?
It's so weird wearing a shirt again. I'm commuting in order to keep better work-life boundaries. I'm putting on a shirt for work like I used to when I worked in business more. And
that's why you are tired.
At the end of the day. And then I'm like out of work mode. That's my little work uniform. It's
Mark's costumes.
Boundaries in the house. Okay, tell us about your life though, Ilan. So how did you get into
thank you. To be honest, my life story for me seems to be pretty boring, but the boringness or the boredom in it is maybe part of the secret, because I went into embodiment after a series of, let's say, unconscious attempts to overcome the shutdown level or the depression level or the kind of chronic boredom that is normal in my society. Or in maybe Western cultures, I have no idea. But I was like best A levels at school and A levels with 17, etc. And like nobody around me looked at me with a sense of, that could be somehow interesting or problematic, or there could be something missing in this life. And then out of my own surprise, I moved to Berlin and decided out of the blue that I would like to start working as a prostitute in Berlin. And I did so for 2 years. And these were 2 years where I felt like I meant to do this work. And I'm not talking about the spectacular aura of prostitution, but this kind of, I never learned something else but tuning into the outer world and pleasing or responding to what the outer world / for example men, for example in sex, wanted me to do or wanted me to behave.
Okay, I'm just going to come in, because before we go into the deeper side, I think, well, you've probably talked about this a lot. I know you wrote a whole book on it. For a lot of people, this is going to be pretty new and pretty interesting, right? So, like, what is it like to work as a sex worker? Is it legal? How does it work practically? Just give us like the bare bones of painting the picture of those 2 years. How was that?
Yeah, thank you. So I do not know how it is to work as a sex worker, because sex work has as many different realities as it has sex workers in. So there is no way of talking about prostitution without clarifying. I'm talking about my form of prostitution.
Okay. So what did that look like? Yeah.
Yes, it was incredibly privileged on every level. So there was nobody interfering with my sexual freedom. There was no chef. I was completely like working on my own. Even though I was working in a brothel, there was nobody above me telling me what to do or what not to do. It was only working during the days, and it was without any kind of, I don't know the English word pimp.
Yeah, pimp. Yeah, so a guy who's like
or drugs
getting money
or
out of
alcohol
you
in the background. So, and that is why I say it was so boring, because there was nothing at all glamorous or special or in any true sense different from our private sex. And I'm not glamorizing prostitution. I rather tend from prostitution, look at our private sex life and say, hey, why are we so immature? Why does nobody tell us how to truly be interested in something else than fast food satisfaction? Like there is no other sex world in sex work. So there is a reflection to our normal sex world in sex work.
Interesting. So some people might imagine it as like, hey, this is a horribly disembodying thing because you're having sex with people you don't have emotional connection to. And I would imagine that as a very disembodying thing. And I've talked to sex workers quite a few times, actually, particularly when I was working in Amsterdam. I talked to people there, and they talked to the experience of disconnecting from their body. And it was like, okay, I'm not really there. You know, my body's there. I'm somewhere else. This almost like trauma dissociation.
Yeah.
And that was their experience of it, that they just sort of weren't really there that much. And I said, wow, that sounds profoundly disembodying as an experience.
Yes.
But what I'm hearing you say is that's actually not so different from how most people are having sex anyway.
I mean, exactly. I'm really the last one recommending anybody to work in the sex work, but I'm the first one warning everybody for just copying what we learn about sex anyway. Our sexuality is disembodied. There is nobody apart from sex work having some kind of the position or the right to look at a sex worker and say, oh, you were dissociating during sex. Who isn't? The men clients I had sex with in the brothel were at least as disembodied as I have been. Right. And there is also some kind of structural violence in patriarchal systems saying that unemotional sex is for women more hurting or traumatic than for men.
Right, so if a guy just meets a Tinder date and it's all consensual and there's no money involved, but he just, you know, is masturbating with someone else's body, as I've heard it described, you know, that to you is as disembodying as someone who, as a woman who's being paid for sex.
Exactly. There's like the only no matter what difference between private sex and sex in a brothel is, in the one setting there is money somewhere around, and in the other one it might not be that way. That's the only true difference that is given. So it's like the color of the curtains. There is a difference, yes. Right. But what the difference matters at the end of the day is not dependent on us creating a shadow world that is full of the other ones.
There is this, and this again for you is your daily life for 2 years, but for many people listening, they've never come across this. They've never talked to a sex worker. It's, you know, it's a rare and weird thing. And what I hear you saying is those things maybe aren't quite as different, you know, like there can be exchanges involved in sex. There is often, maybe that exchange isn't financial, but there's some sense of like, well, I'm going to have sex with this person because of this other thing that I get. You know, maybe they support me emotionally and I feel obliged to have sex with them. You know, so there could be another kind of exchange there. Or
exactly.
It's not so different, as you say, emotionally and embodiment-wise.
Yes. I mean, exactly, coming from embodiment frames, there is no way of reawakening our sensuality as physical beings without having deep, deep, painful insights into the kind of structural violence in our language and society. And when two people say, let's have sex with each other, or I want to have sex with you, they do not want to know what the other person is referring to internally. They just agree to this is a word that means something. But both of them are projecting on the other one, oh, you are feeling horny and you want to have sex with me because I'm so cool. Or whatever. There is something so deeply disembodied and driven by our self-image instead of our physical energy and experience, that we somehow do not want to tap into the embodied reality of sex. Because then, for example, what we would have to deal with is the fear of men during sex, the fear of women during sex, etc., etc., etc. So all of these things are not so sexy in the first place.
Can you slow down a little bit for my brain? This is all really good stuff and you say smart things. I want to take it in. I'm a little bit sluggish today. So I want to come back to something you said. There's this shadow world of sex work. I had an experience this a few years ago. So I'm walking down the street in Brighton and there's a beautiful woman smoking a cigarette on the corner. She looks kind of bored. I'm on my day off. I stopped and talked to her and we started getting on really well. And I said, oh, you know, you seem really nice. Maybe we could have a date sometime. You know, can we swap numbers? Polite, respectful. And she said, yeah, but it will cost you. And I went, what? She's like, oh, well, you should know I'm a working girl. That's how she put it. Working girl is British slang for sex worker. And she said, you know, here's my number if you want to arrange something. And yeah, you know, these are my rates. And I'm on my cigarette break right now. And I said, well, where from? She said, well, there's this building around the corner and this back alley, not more than 500 meters from my house. So really close to where I live, there's a brothel. Yeah. And she said, you wouldn't know it because it hasn't got a sign out front because it's kind of semi-legal in the UK. and decriminalized, we could say, for the workers. So she said, there's the brothel. And I never went in. I wasn't particularly interested in that. It wasn't very erotic to me. So I was like, not interested, thanks, but have a nice day. And there was suddenly this moment of the shadow world being revealed. And just one more piece, if I may, on this, Ilan. I've also noticed something happening in dating in the last few years where there's a blurring. Because women no longer have to stand on street corners or working in a brothel, people can do it privately online. I've got several friends I know that have at least looked into this, female friends. And also I've come across it like in online dating where a girl said, yeah, I'll meet you, but can you just pay for my flight? Or, so for example, I've had lovers and they've said, I'd love to hang out with you in Berlin, but can you just pay for my flight to come? And we've both been in this strange place of, oh my God, is this sex work now? Okay, no, I'm only inviting this person. I like them as a human, but I've got friends in Berlin I could also hang out with, right? And it's like, and they were like, oh, am I a sex worker? I'm getting, you're paying my flight. Is that the same? And it's, women have been enabled to do this online in a very private way, and at a scale. So there's a sort of sliding scale now from paying for someone's flight to paying for money if you have sex with them to, the whole spectrum. And I find this really fascinating that this shadow world is being both blurred and sometimes revealed, as I sort of found in this thing in Brighton very starkly.
I mean, what the shadow world revealed when we look at it is the shadow world isn't the shadow. We created it. We made it up. There is no shadow. There is no blurring between daylight and shadow. It's us externalizing the unknown parts within ourselves. And there is some kind of collective comfort zone of looking at the other ones. And just in statistics, and okay, I'm talking about German statistics, 88% of all men in Germany at least once in a life pay for physical sex with a partner.
Wow.
And almost like 48% of all men in Germany visit a prostitute at least once a month. So who are we as a society saying that these are the other ones? And it's like, yes, you never tapped consciously into the shadow world. Who knows? Who knows, Mark? How many of your girlfriends just didn't tell you? How many of your male friends don't tell you?
Yeah. Interesting. And in Germany, is prostitution legal, semi-legal? I mean, I guess that makes a difference to the...
It's legal. You are trying to save the UK society from my statistics.
Well, I'd be very surprised if 50% of the UK regularly use a prostitute. I would be very surprised. I'm not saying it's huge. I'm not saying it's 1%, but I'd be very surprised. I mean, I've got male friends that I share everything with, and it's pretty rare here. I guess it depends on age groups, demographics. I know, for example, it's very common amongst disabled people in the UK. Very common amongst special needs group, and there are apparently people who specialize in that.
Yeah.
I can imagine there's certain groups that do it more than others.
And I think it's very, very important to stretch that our language is violent because it provides one work, like sex work or prostitution. And it's really not about flattening the thing or those different dimensions. It's not about, sex traffic, forcing somebody to sex is such a crime. It's such a trauma. No way around that. Yeah. And it happens like millions of times every day on this globe. And at the same time, we do not provide us as society and mankind to truly help where it's needed when we just throw stones as everything on everything that sounds like sex work. It's truly, we need a culture of differentiation and of looking at where is my help truly needed. And just wanting to save everybody who is into sex work is some kind of violence, because in the first place, somebody could interview me, what would help me?
And there is a choice actually for some people and not for others. And that's a fairly big distinction, isn't there, between someone who's coerced or a slave or on drugs. Again, we've got a spectrum, someone who drugs, who chooses but is an addict, and then we've got a spectrum right through to someone who actually, I met someone in Austin, Texas, and they were like, I have, they asked, again, was chatting to someone in a bar actually, and they were like, well, actually, I've got 3 guys who look after me. And I'm looking for a 4th, and one gives me a credit card and one gives me an apartment. And this was obviously, and she was really in shape. She was basically said, look, my job's to keep in shape and have a date with these men once a week.
Yeah.
And in exchange, they look after me. And it was very clear this was her chosen lifestyle. And she'd made, a decision that this was actually less work than maybe working in a cafe or a bar or something.
Yeah.
And she was essentially interviewing me. And it turned out she very quickly realized I wasn't rich enough. and I said, look, will you just stay and answer my question? Because I'm fascinated by people that are not typical. Mm-hmm. So I'm always so I had 2 or 3 minutes asking her questions about it. And it was very clear to her, it was just a sort of transactional choice of this is what I do because I don't actually want a crappy job in a call center. And this just makes more sense to me to have, basically all day I keep myself in shape. I walk dogs in the park, go to the gym. And then 4 evenings a week, I see 4 rich men. And she's like, I get to choose them. So I know none of them are evil or, awful human beings. Should I choose these men? And, I started to ask her, isn't there a cost for you emotionally or in terms of intimacy? And, she talked about the social cost from other people shaming her. She talked about the cost of finding it difficult to have a normal boyfriend that she actually wanted. But it was just very interesting because it broke all my assumptions of what a sex worker was, talking to these couple of women I've talked to.
Yeah. And it is, we are compromising between inner freedom and truth and energy and those outer circumstances being put on us by society. Everybody is compromising. Some of them are compromising and do not have the amount of money. Others compromise, have the amount of money, have the amount of freedom, do not have a boyfriend. So who are we, the so-called normal ones, saying that the kind of disbalance in the system happens over there instead of in myself?
I've been in jobs like I was trapped doing something I hated for 10 hours, 9 hours a day or whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought this is really so different.
Yeah, like the more normal, the more the kind of suffering that is suffered from by the majority is somehow then called the healthy thing. But especially, our conversation happens due to in the corona crisis, and there is something visible in us being trapped in a global disbalance that of course is reflected on every level. And this is again such a wonderful teaching from embodiment, that if there is one imbalance in one muscle in my body, it shows up in so many different places at the same time, because we are somehow interconnected and we have many different levels communicating with each other, if we want it or not. So who are we thinking that my sex life is something completely different than my love life, my working life, my nutrition?
I'm imagining someone that's pretty disembodied, pretty not in touch with himself or others, and then suddenly they get naked with their girlfriend or their boyfriend. That doesn't suddenly change, right?
Yeah.
The situation's still there, the societal situation's still there, the embodiment's still there.
Yeah. And I do think, maybe a footnote, that our challenges and immaturity and disbalances that we might face as adults in our sex life refers to unsexual conditioning that is embedded more deeply into our culture, or more deeply into our childhood, more deeply into our school education. Having to sit around and think instead of running around and developing our muscular system while we are in puberty, I would say this is a collective developmental trauma around our birthright to be moving beings. And all of those disembodiment factors being woven into our 24/7 when we grow up, we have to pay the price for that. Not only in sex, but in sex we are like, oh, I wanted ecstasy. Where is it? And it's like, well, where is your ecstasy the rest of your life as well?
Right. Well, how's your ability to contact pleasure in your own body generally?
Yes.
Contact another.
In sex, we want to have a breathing orgasm, but we never breathe in front of the computer.
Right.
So how do we expect ourselves, like, then going into a super orgasmic heroic sprint for us and our partner? It's naive. It's running a marathon without having ever tried to go jogging in the park. That's naive.
Yeah.